Hey there, friends, and welcome to tonight's Explainer. I'm your host, just an old veteran disc jockey, here to spin a few records and share some untold, behind-the-scenes stories of how the radio business literally shaped the classic country music we all know and love. We're going to take a trip back in time, pulling back the curtain on the industry to see how the folks spinning the dials actually steered the course of country history.
You know, my own lifelong romance with country music started way back in 1959. Picture this, I was just 4 years old, and my Uncle Jack, who was the program director down at a massive 50,000-watt station in Fort Worth, Texas, came to visit. He handed me a stack of worn-out 45 RPM records. Well, I played those records day and night until the grooves wore completely flat. That heavy stack of vinyl sparked a lifelong obsession for me, not just with the music itself, but with the fascinating stories of the artists, the songwriters, and the wild radio industry that brought them to the masses.
Section 1. Breaking the Radio Monopoly. Let's get right into it. Before we can even talk about the trivia behind your favorite classic tracks, we have to look at how the federal government basically, and almost accidentally, created the golden age of the independent radio station. Because without this shift, the local DJ as we know it would literally never have existed. Back in the 1940s, a rapid-fire series of federal rulings and massive antitrust lawsuits finally broke the iron grip of the major networks and film studios. It all kicked off with the FCC's 1941 chain broadcasting rules, followed by a huge Supreme Court showdown with NBC in '43. Then, in 1947, the FCC started approving this massive backlog of applications for new, independent radio stations that had built up during the war. Couple that with the landmark 1948 Paramount Pictures antitrust case that shattered vertical entertainment monopolies, and boom, the broadcast landscape was totally transformed. Suddenly, autonomous local stations multiplied across the dial, literally doubling in number in just 4 short years.
Now, what did that actually mean for the listener? Well, during the old major network era, radio was completely dominated by national programming and really expensive live and studio performances that only the corporate giants could afford. But in this new independent station era, these scrappy smaller stations had limited capital, so they had to figure out how to survive. And they did something revolutionary. Instead of hiring expensive live bands, they started locally broadcasting phonograph records directly to their communities. In a flash, we went from 4 national networks to over 100 totally autonomous local markets.
All right, Section 2, New Tech, New Voices.
Of course, none of this independent boom would have worked if it wasn't for some massive technological leaps that put power right back into the hands of the underdogs. The timing was absolutely perfect. The introduction of magnetic tape after the war changed the whole game. Before this, the 4 major record labels controlled the industry, simply because they owned the incredibly costly equipment needed to cut records. But magnetic tape? It was cheap, and it was accessible. It essentially cut out the expensive corporate middleman, allowing much smaller, independent record companies to record their own artists and ship that tape straight to the local radio stations.
And that was paired with another absolute game changer. In 1949, RCA Victor invented the 45 RPM single. It was smaller, it stored more music than those heavy old shellac records, and most importantly, it was way less fragile and much cheaper to ship. Independent labels suddenly had the perfect ammunition to stock the libraries of all those new local radio stations we just talked about.
So here is the absolutely crucial point. With the launch of Billboard's Top 40 chart in 1951, the local DJ suddenly became the ultimate industry gatekeeper. No kidding. Unlike the old network days of playing it totally safe, these local disc jockeys shunned the major label monopolies. They started breaking specialized genres that the major labels were completely ignoring. Massive personalities like Dewey Phillips out in Memphis basically turned their control rooms into the unofficial headquarters for the new power players. I'm talking independent record label executives walking straight into the booth to promote their artists directly.
Which brings us to Section 3, Stories Behind the Songs.
Now that the local DJ was spinning tracks and taking requests right from their own local market, the feedback loop between the audience, the radio station, and the artists created some incredible behind-the-scenes history. Let's dig into the archives, blow the dust off some records, and look at how the realities of this wild new radio industry directly impacted some of your absolute favorite country legends.
We'll start with a true trailblazer. When RCA Victor signed Charlie Pride during a period of immense racial tension in the South, they deployed a very specific strategy. To ensure DJs would judge him strictly by his undeniable vocal talent rather than the color of his skin, RCA shipped his early promos on December 28, 1965, completely devoid of the usual promotional photographs or biographies. They billed him simply as Country Charlie Pride, and they made sure to credit 4 legendary producers on the sleeve: Chet Atkins, Bob Ferguson, Felton Jarvis, and Jack Clement. They wanted local DJs to see those heavy-hitting names and instantly know this was a serious artist, not some gimmick. And you know what? That brilliant radio strategy
worked like a charm. DJs spun their records, the audiences absolutely loved the voice, and by 1969, his track, All I Have to Offer You Is Me, broke history. It became the first of Pride's staggering 29 #1 hits, making him the first black artist to hit the #1 spot on the country charts in 25 long years. That was a massive triumph, and it was made possible right there on the local radio dial.
Let's flip the record and move to another classic. Over at Sun Records in 1955, a young Johnny Cash desperately needed a hit for his boss, Sam Phillips. Cash remembered this incredibly obscure, failed 1950s jazz song called Crescent City Blues by an arranger named Gordon Jenkins. Well, Cash borrowed the lyrics and the melody heavily, sped the whole thing up, added Luther Perkins' hot signature guitar licks, and boom, he wrote his legendary Folsom Prison Blues.
Now, because the original jazz song had never even charted, Sam Phillips basically told Cash, hey, don't worry about it. And for over a decade, it completely stayed under the radar. But when Cash recorded his legendary live album at Folsom Prison in 1968, the song exploded into a massive pop crossover hit, reaching number 32 on the Billboard Hot 100. Suddenly, Gordon Jenkins noticed, and that resulted in a swift $75,000 out-of-court plagiarism settlement paid directly to Jenkins, which honestly was a relatively small sum considering how totally obscure the original track had been. Local radio feedback didn't just shape solo artists either. It shaped legendary bands, too. Take the group Alabama. After ending a grueling 7-year nightclub run, they went on a 1980 Texas tour and were just devastated by what they thought was a super cold reception. People were out there dancing instead of actually watching them play. But an RCA promo man named Wayne Edwards pulled them aside and told them, listen boys, if they don't dance to your music out there, they don't like you. They desperately needed a fast fiddle tune to win over that massive local radio and club market.
Taking that direct, localized feedback straight to heart, songwriters Dan Mitchell and Murray Callum penned a track specifically for them. Alabama recorded it, and if you're gonna play in Texas, you gotta have a fiddle in the band, shot straight to #1 in 1984. Here's a fun bit of radio trivia for you. At 14 words and 54 characters, including punctuation, it became the longest song title to ever hit #1. Meanwhile, the radio dial itself was hosting an absolute battle. Back in the 1950s, the exploding popularity of rock and roll threatened to completely consume the airwaves, pushing traditional country music right out the door. It was a veritable holy war for the radio audience. Impartially speaking, the market simply demanded variety. While rock threatened country's airtime, champions of the traditional sound stepped up. Artists like Ray Price out of the Big D Jamboree in Dallas held the line. And later, George Strait's massive neo-traditional movement, with hits like Amariello by Morning, right alongside Randy Travis and Alan Jackson, proved to radio executives once and for all that the classic, danceable swing sound still commanded massive, dedicated radio audiences well into the late 20th century. Moving right along to Section 4, the shift in the studio. As the industry grew wealthier and way more expansive, the very way music was recorded for radio completely changed. We moved away from those intimate live-in-the-room collaborations to highly polished, isolated productions. Take Tanya Tucker as a perfect example of this divide. When she signed with MCA at just 16, she was sent to record Lizzie and the Rain Man using the Los Angeles method with producer Snuff Garrett. She had to record her vocals completely isolated over pre-recorded tracks. She literally never even saw the musicians. She deeply missed the Nashville style she had grown up with, where the artist and the musicians play live together in one single room, finding that perfect groove organically. Which leads us to our final chapter, Section 5, Fading Out to Automation. Unfortunately, that shift toward corporate isolation and efficiency didn't just happen in the recording studios, it eventually came for the local radio stations too, and it changed the listener's experience forever. As the author of our source material, John Henderson, notes, with syndication and automation which overwhelmed radio, my final DJ position ended in 1992. The incredible era of the personality-driven disc jockey, those men and women who curated local taste, broke new artists, and shared all these incredible stories behind the songs, was quietly replaced by computers, corporate syndication, and pre-programmed playlists fed from hundreds of miles away. Man, we really lost an intimate connection there. We lost the magic of a local DJ dropping the needle on a worn-out 45 RPM record, leaning into the microphone, and telling you exactly why the song you're about to hear actually matters. The heartbeat of the local radio station, which birthed the careers of legends from Johnny Cash to Charlie Pride to Alabama, slowly faded out to static. So, as we sign off on tonight's explainer, I want to leave you with this to ponder.
In our modern world of algorithmic playlists and endless digital streams, who is actually choosing the soundtrack to your life? Are we genuinely discovering the music we love, or are we just being fed what the code dictates? Thanks so much for tuning in, friends. Keep the dial locked and always keep listening for the stories behind the songs.